Okay, I continue from the first video. Life and death at this moment are both, according to Sawaki Roshi's interpretation, expression of the precept. When I live in this moment, when I die in this moment, it's both a precept, it's both the life of the Buddha. No life is destroyed, no life is created. The same is true if I create life. It's not that new life is created, but actually it's the life of Buddha that through me gives birth to new life. When I take away life, it's not that life is killed, but it's just a change that occurs inside the whole universal life. So according to this logic, life actually can never be killed. Killing is not possible. Maybe on an individual basis, yes, but when we talk about the whole, the life of the Buddha, it can never be killed. And that's why Sawaki Roshi can, following this logic, he can say that the universe itself is the precept of non-killing. The life of the Buddha is one with the precept of non-killing, because we're all living this life that cannot be killed. And in this chapter of Shoji, there's a very famous phrase that is often quoted by Zen masters. Here again, Dogen Zenji is talking about the life of the Buddha, and he says, don't try to measure this by your mind, don't try to explain it by your words. When you let go of your body and mind and forget them completely, and you throw yourself into the Buddha's abode, then everything is done from the side of Buddha, and you just follow along without effort or anxiety. You break free from life's suffering and are Buddha yourself. Sometimes maybe we have experiences like that, for example during the Zen. When we fight hard to a certain point during a session, for example, but then it's almost like we hit a wall, we can't get through that wall. But then when we let completely go, maybe even accepting the thoughts that maybe we die, maybe this is the end, I might die here on the cushion. Then I say, okay, let it be. I'm gonna die here on the cushion, and then it out of a sudden seems as if Zazen is taking care of myself. It's not me who's doing Zazen, but Zazen is doing Zazen. It's all done from the side of the Buddha. Sometimes we have these experiences. And I think that's kind of what Dogen Zenji is talking about here. When we think we live life, actually life is living through us. There's a bigger force that usually we're not conscious of this. Usually we're only conscious of our own small ego frame. But even if we think that we are thinking, life is thinking through us. When we think we are living, life is living through us. But now these words can be interpreted in a quite dangerous way, and that's exactly what happened in Japan during World War II. People say, just let go of your body and mind. Stop thinking, stop judging, just go with the flow, go with the whole. And the flow at that time meant the states. Follow the Japanese emperor. And then from the side of the emperor, everything is going to be taken care of. You don't have to make any more effort. There's no need to be anxious. And thus you break free from life's suffering and are Buddha yourself. But I think that's not what Dogen meant, because at the end of the Shoji chapter he clearly says there's a very easy way to be a Buddha. Do not do any evil. Do not try to cling to life and death, but with deep compassion work for all beings. Respect your elders and sympathize with those younger. when you do neither deny things or nor seek them or think and worry about them, then you are called a Buddha. Don't look for anything else. You could still say that Dogen Zenji is not going far enough. And he's still saying, don't think or worry. And he might as well say, think and worry. And that is what's called a Buddha. Still, at least Dogen Zenji says very clearly, do not do any evil. He does not say, if you let go of body and mind, whatever you do, it's okay. Because there can't be any evil. And that's exactly the mistake that Sawakis and others did. Or the mistake that Sawakis and others made during World War II when they said, you're all living the same universal life. Killing is not possible. Inside, from the universal standpoint, killing is not possible. So just go with the flow. When you drop a bomb, just drop it. When you kill somebody with a sword, you're not killing. It's universal life. It's all something happening inside the scenery of universal life. As a philosophy, if we only view the world from this universal standpoint, yes, of course, we are all parts, we are all just single, small, tiny drops inside this huge ocean. And when a wave of this ocean washes away a village on the shore, nobody would kind of blame the universe. Nobody would blame the ocean of breaking the precept. And ourselves just being tiny drops inside this huge giant wave. We also could try to exempt ourselves from responsibility and say, well, I was just a small drop inside this wave, so I don't have any responsibility. But sometimes one drop can change the direction of a wave. And that's exactly what Sawaki Roshi is not saying here. So when we think about what can I, in this moment, here now, do, the fact that I'm part of the universe does not exclude or excuse me from my responsibility. It's rather the other way around. Because I'm connected to the universe, because I'm just one knot inside this huge net that's connected with everything else in the universe, what I do right now is of absolute great importance, because it changes the working of the whole net. So I think that I completely agree with Brian Victoria on this point. Now about where I disagree. For example, in the first of two articles that Brian Victoria writes about Zen masters on the battlefield on a website called Japan Focus. He begins this article with a quote from Otto von Bismarck. The quote is like this: "Any fool learns from his mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others." During my exchange with Brian, I was often reminded of this famous Bible quote of the mote and the beam. Or sometimes in other translations it's a speck of dust and block. Jesus says famously, "Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? First remove the log in your own eye before you worry about the speck in other people's eyes." And it seems that this is what we're doing quite a lot of the time. And maybe in response to this objection, that I could imagine that Brian has faced this kind of criticism a lot of time. Maybe in response to this he's quoting Bismarck. "Any fool learns from his mistakes." The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So he seems to suggest that, well, Bismarck is saying that anyone can notice the log in their own eye, but only the wise notice the speck of dust, the speck of sawdust in the eyes of others. So it's actually more wise to look at the mistakes of others and learn from those than to learn from your own mistakes. Anybody can do that. But I don't think that that's what Bismarck tries to say here. What Bismarck tries to say is probably that we all learn by our own faults and mistakes. We fail, we fall, we get hurt, and anybody learns when it hurts himself. If you fall on your own nose, it hurts, and you learn from that, and you try to your best to not fall and hurt yourself a second time. So what happens when we see somebody else fall? The foolish will laugh and say, hey, look at that idiot, he just fell on his nose. That would never happen to me. The wise man would think, oh, this could actually be me. That could be me. So the wise man, even if he didn't fall himself, he reflects on himself and says, well, this could be me actually. And I don't see that Brian is doing that in his articles. I don't see this attitude when I read Brian's articles. In one of the articles he's quoting a Buddhist Japanese scholar called Hakamaya Noriaki, saying not only was Sawaki not a Buddhist, but he also took up arms against Dogen himself. And it seems that Brian is in complete agreement with Hakamaya. Brian would probably completely agree that Sawaki was not a Buddhist because he was breaking the first precept. Also, according to Brian's interpretation, Sawaki is encouraging others to break the first precept. Now, my question to Brian, and I think this is the only really important question here, is how about us? Are we Buddhists? Brian, are you a Buddhist? Do you think you are a Buddhist? If the answer is no, then this whole discussion is pointless. Brian is not a Buddhist. I am not a Buddhist. I never killed a person, but at Antaiji at one point of time we killed our chickens. They got very old, they stopped laying eggs. At that time we killed chickens. There was a time in the winter when wild boar ended up on our barn eating the Chinese cabbage, and at that time I killed 2 of these boars. So I never killed a human being. I hope I will never do. I never was in a situation where it even seemed to be a kind of realistic option that I needed to do it. But I killed animals. Also, just like Brian, I'm married, I have children. This is a violation of the 10 grave precepts. If violating the 10 grave precepts excludes me from being a Buddhist, would mean I'm not a Buddhist. Not criticizing others is also one of the 10 grave precepts. Just as Brian, I often criticize others. Just like Sawaki, I think that if you think you need to break this precept, you should at least keep to some rules. In criticizing others, you should keep to rules. My personal impression is that Brian is not even keeping to most basic elementary rules when criticizing others. So if the reason why Sawaki is not a Buddhist is because he's breaking the precepts, I don't see how I or Brian could be called Buddhists. we are not Buddhists either. I would be interested on Brian's take on this. If he thinks that he is a Buddhist, while Sawaki is not. And only if he can say that he's a Buddhist but Sawaki is not, then he has a strong point to make. If he says, I'm not a Buddhist, neither Sawaki, that's not a very strong point to make. So if Brian would say, I'm a Buddhist, and I have the impression that that's what he thinks he is, then he somehow would have to make an argument why, for example, he's allowed to marry and have kids. And 7 years ago, he was quoting Dogen from the Shushogi. For those who don't know the Shushogi is a sutra that's recited often in the Soto school, and it dates back no further than the 19th century. It's only 100 and, I don't know, 20, 30 years old. It's not very old. It's not written by Dogen. Dogen died 750 years ago. He didn't live in the 19th century, obviously. The reason why it's sometimes attributed to Dogen, because it consists mostly of literal quotes from Dogen himself. These are patched together. So they are taken out of context, put together a new way. The result is interesting. So Shushogi, it's held in great regard because